Welcome to the latest episode of the Auto Futurecast with me, Chris Kirby, in association with Tomorrow's Journey. Today, I'm joined again by Natalie Sauber. Natalie, we're going to be talking about Gigafactories, battery production, and that very, very exciting world that I know you've got quite a lot of experience in. So, it's going to be an interesting one today.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm super, super excited because there's just so much currently going on in terms of the kind of new developments, the new sort of like OEMs entering into the space, not just in Europe, but in North America, but also in Asia and so forth. So I think there's a lot going on. And then from our side at Arcadis, in terms of delivery, planning, site selection, it is actually really fascinating to be working with big companies and small companies. And I think that's why we have our special guest here today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're joined today by Nikki Rimmington from Volklec. We're going to talk a little bit more about that organisation and kind of how it fits into the landscape. But Nikki, just tell us a little bit about your background and how you arrived here today. In this podcast, in your first podcast.
Thanks, Chris. So my background, it's across manufacturing and industrials, but predominantly automotive. So I spent probably 20, bit more years in automotive, Jaguar Land Rover, Aston Martin. But more recently, I've actually moved into the battery space. So obviously, the electric future is definitely part of where automotive is going, and that's something that I thought would be quite an exciting journey to be on.
Yeah.
But have been involved across product development, product planning, strategy development, corporate finance, all of which is kind of important in thinking about batteries.
Yeah, and it's the sort of the other side. We talk a lot on this podcast series about electrification in all its guises, everything from new Chinese car brands to myths associated with electric cars. But this is kind of the bit behind it and kind of the bit that props up. Literally every electric car has a battery in it, and those batteries come from somewhere. There's a whole complicated kind of supply chain behind that. So tell us a little bit about Volklec and their role in this and in the ecosystem.
Yeah, Volklec is it's an exciting startup in the battery space. So it's UK based. Started up a couple of years ago by founders who were actually previously involved in seed funding behind British Volt. So they are passionate about what the UK has to offer in terms of need and capability. So Volklec is the UK's only independent battery cell manufacturer. So we've obviously got some exciting Gigafactory projects coming with the likes of AESC with Nissan and Agratas with Jaguar Land Rover. But Volklec is positioned to serve the wider array of manufacturers and sectors that exist in the UK. I think it's where there's a big opportunity.
Yeah.
There's not really anything else like it in the world when you look at the UK manufacturing space and the need of those advanced manufacturing companies, and that's what Volklec is set to serve.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's such an interesting space. I think it's such a key part of the ecosystem going forward, and also each country's production capabilities and vehicle production.
Oh, for sure. I mean, look, Gigafactories can definitely not stand on their own. I think there's a massive ecosystem play that sort of like it requires different parties to come together. And I think in one of our pre-chats, Nikki, you mentioned that you are looking at perhaps a little bit of a different market in terms of your sort of like ideal customer base. What would that sort of like entail or look like?
So I think we are. So we are looking at obviously automotive. It's the biggest area of demand in the industry. So but in terms of when you look at the European landscape, you've obviously got large volume OEMs operating in the space. And that's not really the sector we're there to serve. What we are looking to serve is the high performance small volume manufacturers. So a bit more exciting around performance, a bit more exciting around capability, a bit more exciting around some of the challenges that exist in integrating battery cells into their vehicle platforms. So I think that's a huge opportunity for us. And also those manufacturers with the smaller volumes typically find it harder to attract interest from some of the larger battery cell manufacturers. But beyond automotive, you've got some other really exciting sectors coming into play. Aerospace with a huge amount of movement in drones and demand in drones building up. You've got the defence sector, which aerospace and land vehicles as well. You've obviously got, off-highway is another exciting opportunity in the UK. You've got some big brands operating in the space, and then you've got rail and marine, and beyond that,
anything that
medtech
moves,
and
basically.
and doesn't.
And
Yeah,
doesn't,
that's the great thing about batteries.
So could we almost sort of like call you like a micro gigafactory in that sense, or what are we looking for in terms of scale and hourly gigawatt?
So I think so. There's quite a lot of learning, I think, to some of the projects that have tried to find a path forward in Europe, and the approach we're taking is a slightly different one to some of the ones we've seen recently, which is starting small, thinking big, starting small, which is all about taking pragmatic steps. So we need to demonstrate our capability to build the customer demand, and we're taking an approach that leverages capabilities that exist to help us build that foundation for our future. So we are starting small, leveraging partnerships, and primarily one of those is the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre in Coventry, which have an existing manufacturing facility. So we're able to leverage that, start to build cells on that, start to fulfil some of the customer demand, demonstrate we are working in that battery supply chain, and build towards the future. So we start small, start using their equipment. We'll then take a further step, which is building another production line within the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre footprint, and that allows us to forge a path then towards bigger ambitions, and future larger, more typical larger scale battery gigafactory.
Chris, have you been to UK Big?
No, haven't.
Actually,
no.
yeah, we did. We did do the factory visit a couple of months ago, actually, and it was quite fascinating because, yes, you mentioned it's relatively small, but at the same time, it's also so clean.
Yeah,
it is absolutely clean and very sort of like ghost towny like, because there isn't really a lot of happening. And what I really like about it is almost sort of like WeWork space. So you have different companies set up with different cubes, and sometimes you have a room or a floor with lots of almost sort of like curtains, and you don't really know what's happening behind those curtains or doors or so. But it's intriguing space for sure.
Yeah, it's great. There's a lot going on, and I think how it was established was to help drive the industrialisation of British battery tech forward, and that's across the value chain. So battery materials, input materials, the cells themselves. So it's a great space to be able to do that, and it's great to have people coming together and a real opportunity for people to collaborate. But yes, obviously some great equipment there, which is a good opportunity for us to get involved in building our own capability.
Yeah, and it's such an important thing, I think, that capability proving out, because it's often with startups across any stream, the kind of the dreaming big and aiming big is very much a moonshot. I mean, it is a one in a million shot, and that sometimes can end up in high profile failures. And I think that starting small provability piece is definitely a key, particularly in today's like funding world. It's a key part for demonstrating product market fit, and all of that stuff is really key. And you mentioned about kind of learning lessons from other things that have been happening in the market and across Europe. Are there other things that you guys are looking to do? So you mentioned partnerships and mentioned kind of leveraging the facilities here in the UK. Is there other things that you guys are looking to do as well?
Well, I think it's the key is partnerships, because I think when you look at what's gone before, you had companies really trying to do everything. So you're trying to develop the R&D capability at the same time as building really large-scale manufacturing projects, and then bringing customers at the same time. So that's the number of spinning plates, right? And every egg has to be a chicken, and it's a difficult one to coordinate. And if anything goes wrong, it's things can unravel quite quickly. So we are really about establishing the partnerships that will take out a lot of the risk out of that approach. So we have a partnership with a Chinese battery company, which is one of the different approaches that we're taking. You can't get away from the fact that the dominance in battery cells is in China and Asia, 15 to 20 years ahead of kind of the rest of the world. So it's about leveraging the capability they've got, which also addresses a concern in the customer space, which is about taking risk out of the product. So they've got very high investment, long-term programs that they want to make sure they're delivering on time. So they need proven technology. So partnership with Far East Battery in China for us is helping us ensure we're delivering a proven technology. And leveraging the UK BIT facilities, as I say, it takes some of that initial capital intensity out of the project, so we can start to really demonstrate proof points along the way.
So on that partnership, so is it then true that we still sort of like hold some kind of almost momentum or wow factor for Asian OEMs to want to partner with, whether that's UK or European OEMs in that sense? Or have we, I don't know, I don't want to say almost sort of like given up or sort of like handed over the power, but are we still in the race?
I think we are still in the race. I think there has just been a huge amount of momentum in China and Asia, and as I say, the capability that they've got there is very strong. But there have been some pivot points in the industry in terms of demand pushing back with the pushback of phase out of the internal combustion engine ban in the automotive space. There's still movement around the technologies, which means that actually it's changed the landscape a little bit. We started to see some oversupply from China. They're starting to look at, they've got massive production facilities. They need to keep those up to date. There's a lot happening in process optimization, as an example. And I think those are elements where we can start to build up our capabilities. And for me, it's about playing to our strengths. I think as a country, what can we do that helps us find other ways to be able to compete? There will always be areas at which we in the West will struggle to compete with China and Asia when it comes to labour costs, potentially energy costs as well. But there are other things I think we can do, leverage capability in driving a niche area of capability and competitiveness, whether it's the customers that we serve or process optimization opportunities, or future R&D opportunities in the space as well.
I think there's a big question around timing as well, which you briefly alluded to there as well, but I just want to pick up on that a little bit more. The movement from ICE to EV, the timing of it is still difficult to predict, and volumes are really difficult. You mentioned also about the changing battery technology also happening, so must be a very hard time to get that right, which again comes back to, I guess, why the starting small thing works. But how do you guys kind of make sure that you're sort of staying ahead or staying with, but also still being able to drive something or not being too late to the party?
Well, I think we've benefited from the pushback of the ICE ban in automotive. I think the result of that has been obviously a number of manufacturers postponing their programs just based on where you spend cash and when, isn't it? But that's meant that actually it's enabled us to come in at a point where previously we may have been a bit late to the party. But it's going to be important, clearly, that we still maintain a fast to market approach. But I think it isn't all about automotive. There are clearly other sectors which aren't affected by that timing shift, but they are, I guess, more nascent and smaller in terms of overall demand and opportunity. But as I say, aerospace, there are a lot of things happening, and defence. Again, we've seen a lot of news flow in the defence space about the need for electrification, but obviously also the sovereignty piece is key, and I think that's comes back to the other play to our strengths bit, is actually the opportunity to localise. And build the supply chain capability and resilience is going to be important to compete with some of the other geopolitical considerations.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that localization thing is going to be so key. I mean, the UK being has always been a player in the automotive manufacturing space, not the biggest, but always had it, and that's kind of slowly eroded over time. And I think it's going to be so important that we have a stake in this game, and the key part is going to be around the production of batteries. What wheels you put on it and what shell you put on it is going to be less important. The battery is going to be a key part, and particularly, I guess, what we've seen recently with tariffs and some of the geopolitical challenges, very hard to predict how that's going to go. So I guess having some sovereignty control over that production of batteries means we won't all be on horse and cart in 10 years time because someone's fallen out with someone somewhere and means we can't get batteries anymore.
It's a big risk, isn't it, when you look at some of the particularly large OEMs who have capability in Europe as well. There's always going to be that pull of the UK needing to demonstrate competitiveness versus sister plants. It's slightly different for some of the smaller manufacturers again, though, isn't it? Because they don't necessarily have that alternative manufacturing location or opportunity. So, but it's key that we are able to ensure their future survival by localising the components that we need, including batteries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that definitely the tariff piece is interesting as well, about kind of where things are produced. So there's the localization, I guess, sovereignty protection, but also a little bit about where things are, the Chinese partnerships that you mentioned. If you're able to produce batteries here, the tariff might be less to go to the US or to Europe or whatever that might look like. So I think also that spreading risk for all of the battery manufacturers is probably key as well. Have production in lots of places. Potentially something that you guys are thinking about working on.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think there are a number of smaller manufacturers will be looking at single source of supply, but other manufacturers will be trying to hedge their bets, hedge their input materials, dual source components. So those are absolutely opportunities.
Interesting. And I think thinking about the gigafactories themselves, I'm going to look to you now. I know you've been involved in some of them, but what kind of things goes into the strategy around planning some of this stuff? So I see that excited look on your face now. You're right, here we go.
Oh my God, there's so much actually happening. I mean, it starts all the way at the beginning when we're talking about site selection. Where do you want to position your sites? And look, we've had some clients who where one of the key criteria for site selection was, well, the CEO basically needs to have an international airport close by because they will be coming from that. And someone else was saying that they can't handle the south, so we should definitely only be looking at the north. I mean, and there's some really sort of like wacky things that come into play. But I think the biggest hurdle is that people in general underestimate the amount of planning, it's sort of like the amount of thoughts that go into the whole planning and permitting side of things. Because if you wanted to open up a factory in location X, there's a whole lot of sort of like factors that get involved into it. So, for example, if you wanted to open a factory in Germany, German regulations are incredibly difficult and hard to come by, and it's just sort of like having that understanding about what does it actually take. And then once you do have a site that you want to have for your next facility, then there's other sort of like components that feed into it, not to say the least, from a community-based perspective. I mean, we've seen some things happening with Berlin and Tesla, and that was obviously massively delayed in terms of because the community wasn't really brought on. There was a lot of sort of like environmental due diligence thing that happened. I think the foxes were a major concern, save the foxes and the trees and some other things as well. And I think they just basically put their hands up and says, look, I mean, we're building a factory here one way or another. This just sort of like has to happen. But I think that is not the way that we should think about these assets, because they should be integrated in the community. They should be integrated with the necessary infrastructure to not have them just be another asset that at some point will sort of like cause a lot more problems and issues than actually worth it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that would be interesting to our listeners, and I always say that basically what this thing would be interesting to me, and I hope would be interesting to our listeners, is to understand what things go into a gigafactory. What things you have to put in it to kind of make something work. It's probably a question to both of you, which is why I'm looking this way. But into thinking about the scale, size, the supply chain, you mentioned the environmental factors, how much energy, water, all of those things that it need. What if we were building one here? What things do we need in it?
Well, apart from Natalie's needing to be near an airport for the
yes,
CEO north versus south.
Those go as a given, obviously. Yeah.
So I think some of the fundamentals are going to be the availability of skills. So battery factory can only operate if you can draw on the right capabilities and sufficient number of people to be able to do it. Yeah. So being somewhere where there is a sustainable route to maintaining your workforce and the right skills is really key. Energy availability is another one. They are massively energy intensive facilities, and there are actually very few sites that are able to drive in that level of power. And especially when you're looking, we've looked at a number of locations across Europe, and it's interesting. You look at places trying to position themselves as tech parks or eco parks, and actually don't necessarily have a sufficient roadmap for power supply to serve all the tenants that they're looking to bring in. So that's another consideration, as well as renewable power as well, just to make sure that we are going to fulfil our sustainability requirements. So I guess that's the that's the macro element of going in. But then you've got to consider there's going to be a huge amount of planning on what are you going to make, what's your product going to be, what does that mean in terms of how your facility is going to break down into different modules for different chemistries, different battery cell formats. You know, is it going to be one mega giga production facility that's producing one type of battery cell with one type of chemistry, or are you going to be looking at separating it down into different modules? And then there's the question around how much automation are you going to need in your processes, as well as all the other considerations around where your logistics coming in, how you're managing logistics out. Are you largely a domestic market? Are you an export market? Do you need to consider free port investment zone considerations to manage some of your economically manage your inputs and exports to gain some tax relief? So a
few bits. That's quite a long list, and I imagine there's a further list on that as well. It's interesting, just picking up on saying about the type of battery production. One of the things that was kind of in my mind when I was asking the question was thinking about literally the size of these things, because you said you can have a massive thing that mass produces one type of battery, but we also talked earlier about the still changing types of technology, the different uses. I'm guessing it would be, whilst it might be the same process to make a drone battery and a car battery, they would need different. You couldn't make one in the same production line, right? So, or maybe you could. I don't know. So that's the kind of thing. Can you just have a huge facility with all of this stuff that makes all of these different things, or do you need to kind of split those up? And does that make sense as a strategy?
So I guess the dream would be it's one type and everyone gets one type. And actually, you can use one cell, the same cell across different industries. It's how you then integrate the cell into a module and a pack to achieve the different application requirements. But I think inevitably there will be different considerations for the different sectors, whether it's how much acceleration or discharge do you need from a battery cell, cost versus performance capability. So, typically, historically, your NMC chemistry versus your LFP chemistry, and then future-proofing. So some of the chemistries which are still in development but not commercially available around solid state is a prime example. Some of those considerations, which is where your product strategy or your demand pipeline are both going to feed those kind of decisions. Keeps
you busy.
That's
Your whiteboard in your office has all of those things written on it. And Nat, how do the mixture of those, I guess, strategic challenges kind of impact how you'd go about the planning? Because I guess there'll also be things of like the different types of materials that you use. A solid state battery is going to use different materials to a lithium ion battery in some way. Does that need different permits, different regulations? Does all of that have to also be factored in when you're putting stuff together?
It does actually. And I think it's sort of like, ultimately in an ideal scenario, we want our clients to basically have it all figured out and then basically just give us the specifications and say, this is what we need. We basically want to buy yesterday. So please make an effort of doing it. But there's, I think it's, from a technology side, I think is one end, but then also I think what's really important or intriguing, at least from our perspective, is you have the product, you have the battery, but then what happens in the afterlife, the aftercare, and the recycling bit? Because you can't just push something out. It would, we know the batteries will have a shelf life, and how does that sort of like work on the recycling piece? And I think that's, I guess, also a question to you, Nikki, in terms of, are you guys involved in this at all, or are you basically saying, nope, this is our product, and then we'll sort of like just take a step back and focus on what we actually do and leave other people to deal with the recycling side of things? So
I think it's definitely something you need to be involved in as a battery cell manufacturer, as a responsible manufacturer anyway. It's something that you want to be able to do. I think we all recognise the importance of the need for a circular economy. But that is supported by the European battery regulations. The drive to make sure you are increasing the recycled content of your battery and managing the recycling at the end. And again, it's traceable back to you. So how have you as a battery cell manufacturer ensured the responsible end of use of your products, whether it be end of use and recycling or reuse or repurpose? You need to be able to demonstrate that you know where your battery has ended up and you're managing and measuring the impact impact of that. So that's,
yeah, because it's actually quite a big undertaking. I think
Yeah,
if someone
yeah.
just says, recycle batteries, it's not just, we'll just use it for something else, but then I guess you can recycle it and use it for, I don't know, a second life application, or you can completely take it apart and then try to either sell off the parts or use the parts for something else. And I think there's a whole, I guess, supply chain on the one hand coming into effect, but also different players then coming into play as well.
Yeah. And also you've got, I think everyone felt that batteries wouldn't last as long as they are. So you've got all of these recycled content legislation coming in, and then it's well, where am I going to get the batteries to recycle to fulfill it? So it's an interesting second industry of and value as to being able to support that.
Yeah, I did ask a slightly awkward question at an event for a company that had launched a very large-scale battery recycling plant, and I said, when do you expect some batteries to turn up and how many of them? Because it doesn't appear to be that many that are coming off. They're not going out of use as quickly as you would have thought. So there's going to be a bunch of people sitting in a thing go, oh, look, we've got one turned up. Everyone get excited.
Ring the bell.
So yeah, it definitely is interesting, but also it's such a challenge for a business in that space. There can't be many other industries where you have to be responsible for the thing when it leaves for almost like an infinite amount of time, because it could go into multiple lives. It could go into battery storage for 20 years and then comes out and you guys have still got to go, oh yeah, I know where that one, where I left that one. It's somewhat of an undertaking. I mean, do you think that how do you see that mix coming into play between the actual recycling and the reuse, I guess, if that's a way of distributing?
To be honest, it's really hard to say. I think, as I say, I think the need for recycled content will drive a pull from the recycling industry to support that in batteries. And again, I think when you look at the pipeline of and demand pull into automotive of where batteries are going, I think that'll be the big draw to say, okay, well, where are those batteries ending up and how much? If you can secure the majority of batteries back from automotive to fulfill your recycling requirements, then that's, I would imagine, likely where we're going to be seeing it. But the reuse opportunity in other applications, particularly, commercial domestic energy storage opportunities is again big opportunity. But that's where, again, the development of future chemistries may see those energy storage requirements moving into a different way, sodium ion or other chemistries, rather than reused batteries. Many
variables. My list of variables that you guys are contending with is getting longer and longer as another whole recycling variable. But so we think maybe that there'll be a pull from the recycling industry not to start ripping batteries out of usable cars, but like trying to find there'll be a balance in the push and pull of reuse versus recycling because of the raw material content and some of the goals. Also interesting consideration in that, especially in the car space. But for us, this is going off on a bit of a tangent from these topics, but definitely we have a theory about electric cars in a fleet context and about the ability to operate them for longer, almost through that battery degradation cycle and using them in different purposes. So definitely see that rather than going into a recycling, I'll run the vehicle through basically 2 cycles of a fleet. When it's 6 years old, 150,000 miles, I throw it away. Actually, that moving into a 3rd and 4th cycle, but for different uses, is really interesting. And then almost with the 5th use being storage. But it seems like possibly in those 5th, 6th and 7th use, there might be some pull to say, let's get the worst ones out. And
I think we're definitely seeing that happening, where again the cost of throwing away or putting into another application a whole battery module because it's not performing as it should, when it's likely 1 or 2 cells within that module not performing. So we're seeing again more development around that sector and being able to both diagnose which cells aren't working as they should and also be able to replace single cells rather than whole modules.
And that was the thing that I had with a previous guest actually talking about the chemistry and batteries, and was saying actually some of the efficiencies being driven by the Chinese manufacturers actually was making the cells more difficult to repair because they were making them kind of less modular to make them cheaper in mass production, but therefore I guess the ability to repair the individual cells or replace individual packs is more difficult. So again, is that another factor that you think we were talking earlier about making the individual packs and having them available for different uses, but does that sort of drive up your production cost and maybe in the mass production make it more difficult?
I think on a vehicle manufacturer level, when you look at cells into modules, modules into packs, or whether you start looking at cell to packs or even cell to body opportunities, those will be definite considerations that are thinking around, and how do I manage the total life cost of what I'm producing. So it's maybe less of a consideration for a battery cell manufacturer, but you know, as Volklec wanting to be have a partnership with our end customers, we need to be working with the integrators and the end customers on how we achieve the right solution from a whole life cost.
Yeah, and I guess being that more general, more looking at a wider market, like you say, if you're Volkswagen producing batteries, you know you're going to say, well, I'm going to build these 3 chassis, so I want 5 different battery sizes to fit in them. You can mass produce them, but I guess for you with a smaller customer type and maybe a more varied, again, that slightly more modular approach is more interesting.
Yeah, I think it's that again. The dream would be having a flexible solution that you can fit into many different vehicle packages and applications. So watch this space.
Absolutely. And just thinking a bit about some of the operational challenges that you might see in kind of the scaling up of this. What are the kind of big challenges that you see, and thinking back again to the learnings from some of the people that haven't quite got it right so far?
So I think one of the key ones that we've seen as a pitfall is the investment and securing investment. Yeah. So in order to do that, you need you need robust planning, which again is where the likes of Arcadis come in. Is we make sure that we've done the right approach and thought about things the right way in terms of the master plan and the project plan of how things come into place. But clearly there will be certain milestones along the journey where investment needs to be secured, and investors will be looking for what's the level of risk. When they're looking at the level of risk, it's have you got the product strategy defined right in terms of the products the market fit, and what's the customer demand looking like? Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for startups in particular is the famous valley of death. How you've got a great idea. Yep. You've got a good execution plan, but until you've secured that customer demand, that's the difficulty in moving things forward.
Yeah, surprisingly volatile, the market. And also that's what we saw, because we were dealing with big, huge established OEMs, and then also really sort of like new startups coming into that space. And it was almost, I find it more fun to work with startups anyway, because they are unpredictable. They're super exciting, unpredictable. So for a big company like ours, not the ideal client, but I personally find them really fascinating because they want everything done in such a fast way. And it's sort of like it opens up opportunities on the one hand, but it's also a little bit more hindering, because certain conversations or certain deals or certain types of strategies are obviously done a lot easier when you have a big name pinned towards you. With a small name, you basically really have to do a lot of fighting in the early stages. But again, it's sort of like, it is quite an interesting space to work with. How did you sort of like, on that note, how do you feel around the policy side of things? Where are we, like from a UK's perspective? Are we, I know it's a bit of a loaded question, but are we making headway, or are we almost sort of like pulling, not so much back, but are we putting roadblocks in place?
So I think we are definitely moving forward. I think, if you go through the modern industrial strategy, has laid out some definitely some enablers. So they've highlighted battery and automotive as some of the frontier industries that they're supporting. They've identified ways to again enable things through the clusters, the geographical clusters, so that helps from a skills development perspective, and also investment zoning perspective, and also I think helping to support that investor or investment attractiveness, where you've got clusters and an ecosystem. And you mentioned before, Natalie, these things can't stand as a single asset. You've got to build the ecosystem around it. So I think they've called all of those out in the industrial strategy, and they've also driven a bit more, of a joined-up approach when it comes to what was Faraday's, now the Battery Innovation Programme, and the APC, Advanced Propulsion Centre UK, the sort of funding opportunities and areas of funding focus, and how you draw those together to try and bridge that valley of death. I think the challenge is still the macro environment when it comes to equity and capital markets, and looking at what, the investor risk appetite, I think, has gone down when you look at, again, it goes back to those market failures. I think the markets themselves are fairly stagnant. Money is shifting to some new sexy sectors.
You did previously mention. Sorry,
I was
Chris.
just going to say, just say AI in your. Just change the company name to AI. 500 million done.
That might work. Yeah, we did briefly touch upon the future workforce skill, and what one of our clients, what they were actually approaching us with was saying, look, Natalie, is there a way for us to engage directly with the universities and directly with have an influence on the kind of the future of the courses? Is that something that we can basically almost sort of like use that as a talent for the recruitment? And it's just I love that kind of attitude where, we don't just build an asset and basically expect people to come to us, but no, we're almost sort of like creating that ecosystem on making sure that there is a workforce in place, there's a future workforce in place, and that we have the infrastructure to not only get our products in and out, but also to make it livable in terms of our key people living there. But then at the same time also making sure that the environmental footprint, which I think a lot of companies these days talk about, what is the nature, or what is the, how do we value and measure the impact that our asset will have on nature, is incredibly important these days. So it's a bit of sort of like an interplay almost that needs to be taken into account. And I think companies such as yourselves, the ones that are really sort of like going to stand out is the ones who will make sure that they basically got all their bases covered, but at the same time will also have a positive impact to the community, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So I think that there were two elements there. One was the how you make sure you're getting the right skills, and I think there are some, is probably helped by the fact we're starting to see the clusters around battery manufacturing in the Northeast and in the Midlands, because they're being quite creative around how they go about setting that up. They understand that it's not necessarily the typical skills that are needed, so actually they're saying to us, tell us what you need, and we will design those programs, whether it's the universities or whether it's apprenticeship training colleges. I think that there's some really good discussions to be had around that, and making sure we're training people in the right way and bringing the right skills in to support, in our case, battery cell manufacturing. But I think there are some great opportunities there, and autonomy in the regions to be able to do that, which is great. The sustainability piece and thinking about the long-term impact on the environment and the assets we're creating is another really good one. And I love your story of Tesla in Germany and the Foxes, because the power of the people in those environmental conversations is very strong. And the last thing you want, and the last thing you want to do is get off on the wrong foot with the people and the community you want to be part of and draw in. So you
want it to be that positive thing of production, jobs, longevity,
and
future,
jobs is absolutely
all of that
something.
Stuff,
but save the foxes, save the bees.
Yeah.
This is going to be newts. All of them. They're all hugely important from an environmental perspective. So we have to look after it.
No, that's great. And I think we were going to finish up with some quick-fire questions in a segment that we have only just come up with about 10 minutes before this and didn't give you any preparation for either, but we were going to do a few quick fire questions now. So what we want to see a little bit, test a few of the areas that we've been in and see if there's a segment worth keeping, I guess.
Well, I'm going to start off with a really broad question, but we're 2025. What would you like to see by 2030 within the Gigafactory space for the UK?
So I think vibrant customer demand. So I think a real shift in terms of appetite to shift into electrification. I would like to see more excitement and interest and appetite from the investor space. Again, I think that's key in setting it up. And I would like to see a much strengthened ecosystem. So the supply chain, I think there's some fantastic capability. Some of it is slow, not slow burn, but long duration opportunities. But I think really getting more momentum out of into the supply chain supporting ecosystem. We talked about recycling, so that's not a quick fire answer.
No, that was definitely
I think
that could
those
definitely
are the things
count,
that are going to make a difference.
Definitely fine. Yeah, no, that's good. No, come on, you've got the questions. Hit with these. I'm just going to nod. I'm going to nod to all of the answers.
If you could fix one of the barriers that sort of like are standing in our way right now, what would it be? Would it be supply, technology, policy, or skills?
I think the biggest thing standing in the way at the moment is actually demand. I think it's enabling. I think people understand the need to move towards electrification, but it's making the step, and it's getting the UK is still a relatively small market, so it's unlocking the critical mass of demand opportunity that means it takes longer for us to get to giga scale. I think the other one will be supply chain. The battery cells work really well as the anchor or the linchpin for supporting the automotive OEMs and driving in the input materials higher up the supply chain, like the cathode active materials. There's good movement in lithium, but you need the battery cell manufacturing to bring it all together. But I think building more of that or strengthening that capability in the supply chain.
The diversity of demand drives all of those things, right? And then you could be in a world where with a product where there is really strong demand, and then you have barriers further down. But at the minute, it's not that there isn't demand, but you want that diversity, I guess, of demand from different sources and the real commitment to it, because then that brings in investment and supply chain and all those other bits. So definitely, that's great.
Gustav, do you have time for one more?
Yeah, time for one more.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about gigafactories?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I'm glad we stayed for that one. That's good.
Misconception about gigafactories, that they're all in China.
Nice.
That's true.
So that we've got. So I think AESC has been a great first demonstrator for UK, and again, it's come about through partnerships. But we're starting to see more in Europe. So, again, it comes to that need for critical mass of opportunity. I think that's probably one of them. And obviously, US is another big market. But we're nowhere near where we need to be. What's another misconception about gigafactories?
I definitely think just the soundbite of "they're all in China" is perfect. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah. I guess another one is maybe the polluting aspect of it, because I think again that's where, going back to when I was at Aston Martin, I was trying to push back against batteries a bit at the time, because when you looked at it from what we call well-to-wheel perspective, actually the polluting nature at the time of producing batteries versus what we had with internal combustion engines, which was something highly recyclable, not taking as much of the fossil fueled energy intensity to manufacture, was one of my arguments against batteries back in the day. But I think that's clearly moved forward in terms of where energy is coming from now and where energy will need to be coming from going forward. So I think it's, the Gigafactory itself is not this polluting monster, or doesn't have to be this polluting monster. Yeah,
the famous Top Gear Toyota Prius thing I can picture on the flip chart, which the fact that it was Clarkson on Top Gear means it was at least probably 10 plus years ago, but I think that's still in a lot of people's minds, isn't it? Of like, look at this Toyota Prius, it's gone round the world 15 times or something before it arrives. And so a nice image, nice misconception to finish on. Natalie, thanks so much for joining us again, for bringing our new segment, which I think works, but we can polish.
Yes,
definitely.
100%.
Bringing your expertise in this area, and Nikki, thanks so much for coming all the way down. It's been really, really fascinating, and such an interesting area and such a key thing actually for the country and for our manufacturing goals longer term. So really excited to follow your journey, and hopefully we'll have you on again, and we'll hear how things have been going. So it'll be great stuff. So thanks everybody for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe. You can catch all the episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, and Apple, and we'll catch you again next time. Thanks very much.